Why do you miss someone you know was bad for you? Not someone you idealize, not someone you think you should go back to. Someone you understand very clearly and intellectually was not good for you. And yet emotionally, their absence still has a pull. This experience confuses people deeply because missing is often treated as evidence. If I missed them, they must have mattered. If I missed them, maybe the relationship wasn't that bad. If I missed them, maybe I made a mistake. And so longing becomes suspicious. Something to argue with, something to suppress or explain away. But psychologically, missing someone is not a verdict on the relationship. It is not proof that it was right, and it is not a command to return. Missing is not a judgment, it's a signal. This episode is about what the signal actually points to, and understanding missing as a layered psychological experience, one that can include attachment, identity, fantasy, and relational meaning all at once. Attachment does not dissolve just because insight arrives. This is the first thing that requires clarification in this. You can know clearly that someone was wrong for you. You can understand the patterns. You can even feel relief about the ending, and still, you can miss them. Attachment bonds are not logical contracts. They are emotional imprints formed through proximity, intensity, and shared experience. So they do not just disappear simply because the mind has reached clarity. This is especially true in relationships that were inconsistent or emotionally charged, such as when closeness would come and go, when connection felt intermittent, or when presence was unpredictable. Absence doesn't activate the truth of the relationship, it activates the bond. But attachment alone doesn't explain the whole experience. Often what you miss is not only the person, it is the version of you that came alive in that relationship. Some relationships awaken parts of us that had been dormant. A desire, intensity, curiosity, maybe a sense of being wanted or chosen. So when the relationship ends, those parts, they don't just go immediately and find a new home. They go quiet, and their silence is felt as longing. You begin to associate that aliveness, for example, with the person, even though the person was not the source of it. You don't miss who they were, you miss who you were allowed to be. What makes this especially complex is that the psyche does not experience identity as something abstract. It experiences identity as something felt. When a relationship activates a certain self-state, a sense of desirability or intensity, imagination or emotional sharpness, that self-state becomes momentarily real. It shapes how you move through the world, how you perceive yourself, how you relate to others. When the relationship ends, that self-state doesn't disappear immediately. It lingers without context, and this creates a subtle psychological confusion. You feel less alive, less charged, less engaged, and the mind searches for an explanation, and it finds the most obvious one, the person. But the person was not the source of the aliveness. They were the context in which it emerged. This is why missing can feel disorienting rather than purely emotional. It's not longing, it's a brief loss of orientation. When a relationship ends, the psyche does not only lose connection, it loses structure. This is also why people often rush into new relationships too quickly, or they idealize past ones. Not because they want the same person again, but because they want access to a familiar internal configuration, to a way of being that once felt vivid and coherent. Missing, in that sense, is not regressive. It is transitional. It marks the space between who you were in that relationship and who you have not yet become without it. Okay, let's look at an example. Imagine you are someone who was in a relationship that was emotionally uneven, meaning there were moments of closeness, that felt intoxicating, moments where conversations flowed, where you felt seen and desired and awake. And then there were moments of distance, withdrawal, or emotional absence that left you guessing. Over time, the relationship became exhausting. You knew you were giving more than you were receiving, and you knew that inconsistency was costing you your peace. So eventually, you leave. And at first, there is relief. Your nervous system calms, your days become quieter, but then something else appears. A dull ache, a sense of flatness, a feeling that something vibrant has gone missing. You know you don't miss the anxiety, and you know you don't miss the uncertainty either, and you don't miss the emotional labor. But what you miss is the charge, the way maybe you dressed when you were seeing them, the way your imagination felt more alive with them, the way anticipation sharpened your senses. And this is where people get confused. They think they miss the person, but in reality, they are just missing a self-state, a version of themselves that felt more intense, more alive, and more seen. That self-state did not belong to the other person. It belonged to you, but because it emerged in that context, your mind links it to them. Sometimes longing is not about the person who left, it's a signal from the part of you that went quiet afterward. You don't miss what happened sometimes, you miss what almost happened. And this is where fantasy enters the picture. Relationships that end clearly with clarity, consistency, they leave less room for your imagination. But relationships that were unfinished, inconsistent, or ambiguous, they leave psychological space. And in the mind, this space is filled through fantasy. Fantasy thrives where reality was incomplete. It builds narratives from fragments. It turns moments into symbols, and it magnifies potential while softening memory. Fantasy is not about denial, it's about uncollapsed possibility. In fantasy, the relationship finally becomes what it never fully was. So you imagine that they finally show up, they finally choose you, the timing finally works. And because fantasy exists outside of time and reality, it feels emotionally compelling. But fantasy is not a memory of the relationship. It is a construction built in the absence of it. This is why closure can feel painful, not because it erases love, but because it collapses fantasy. Another layer here is relational meaning. Even in relationships that were bad for us, something meaningful often occurred. You may have felt recognized and desired or mirrored. Someone may have maybe even seen a part of you that others had always overlooked, or reflected back something very essential, even if they could not sustain it. Being seen is not the same as being cared for, and yet, being seen does matter. There's another layer here that often goes unnoticed. Human beings do not seek love or safety. They also seek confirmation of existence, to feel that one's inner world is registered by another. In some relationships, even unhealthy ones, this confirmation occurs intensely but briefly. Someone notices your depth, your sensitivity, your complexity. And even if they cannot stay, even if they cannot offer consistency or care, the moment of recognition leaves a mark. And this matters because recognition stabilizes identity. It tells the psyche, I exist in the eyes of an other. When that recognition disappears, the psyche does not immediately know where to relocate that sense of existence. And so longing emerges, not necessarily for that person, but for the experience of being reflected. What disappears isn't always the relationship, sometimes it's the mirror. This is why missing someone can coexist with clarity. You can know they were not good for you and still feel their absence. Because what is being mourned is not the bond itself, but the loss of a certain relational meaning, the feeling of being witnessed even if it was imperfectly. And this is where people usually become harsh with themselves. They accuse themselves of weakness, of inconsistency, of romanticizing harm. But this is not weakness. It is the psyche acknowledging that something meaningful did happen, even within a flawed structure. The task then is not to deny that meaning, but to know how to differentiate it from the relationship that could not sustain it. So when the relationship ends, you don't only lose the person, you lose a mirror that once reflected something vital back to you. Let's imagine you were once with someone who did not treat you well, but in certain moments, they made you feel deeply recognized. They maybe noticed your intelligence, your sensitivity, and your depth, or they spoke to a part of you that felt invisible elsewhere, but they could not hold you consistently. They could not meet you with reliability or care. So you leave, and later, when you miss them, it feels confusing because you don't miss how small they made you feel at the end. You don't miss the imbalance. You don't miss all the waiting. What you miss is the way you felt seen by them. And again, this does matter. We often confuse acknowledgement with safety. We confuse recognition with care and intensity with intimacy. And when the mirror disappears, the part of you that was reflected feels lost. Missing someone does not mean they were right for you. It means something real was touched. Missing is not a command. It is a question. The question is not, should I go back? The question is, what did this relationship awaken in me? And where can that live now? When you understand missing in this particular way, it becomes less frightening, less authoritative. You stop arguing with the feeling and you start listening to what it's pointing towards. Longing does not mean you failed, and it does not mean that you chose wrong. It does not mean that the relationship somehow was secretly right. It simply means a bond existed, a self-state was activated, and a mirror reflected something meaningful. And those experiences, they do not disappear just because the relationship ended. You can honor what was real without returning to what was harmful. Sometimes missing someone is not about going back, it's about reclaiming forward, reclaiming the parts of you that felt alive, finding mirrors that don't distort you, and choosing relationships where recognition and care coexist. Missing becomes painful only when it is misunderstood. When you stop treating longing as evidence and start treating it as information, it loses its power to confuse you. And what remains is clarity, not about the past, but about what you are now ready to choose differently.